What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for joining me today. I have realistic episode for you today. And as anyone who follows me knows, I am very much the optimist. I am very much want to talk about all the fun stuff and everything like that. But every once in a while, I think it's okay to talk about some of the concerns that I potentially have or we potentially have in regards to the team. So I want to go today over some real legitimate concerns that I have with the current state of the Packers offense. Now, before I get there, couple quick disclaimers. I actually really like the potential for this offense. And I actually very much expect this offense to be a top 10 offense. I don't think they're going to struggle to put up points in the vast majority of games. I have a ton of faith in Matt LaFleur, a ton of faith in Aaron Rodgers. I have a ton of faith in Adam Stenavich and Luke Butkus to make this offensive line work, even if they're down Bakhtiari and Elton Jenkins for a period of time. So there is a lot of credit that's built up within the entire structure of this organization offensively that I think they are, for the most part, going to be just fine. And I think at the end of the regular season, you're going to see this be a top 10, if not even better offense. So you might say, then, Andy, why are we talking about concerns on offense? Because quite frankly, I simply do not care. And I've mentioned this before. I don't care what happens in the regular season unless something goes terribly wrong, in which case all of these conversations are for naught anyway. The Packers are going to be a playoff team. And I'm not saying something crazy can't happen, because we all know it can. But the only way, in my opinion, that this Packers team is not going to the playoffs is either A, due to a significant Aaron Rodgers injury that takes him out for some period of time, or B, significant injuries to like 20 other of the vastly important Packers on this team. The NFC North is not that strong. The NFC as a whole is not that strong. Unless something catastrophic happens, which again, all of these conversations are then for naught anyway, this is going to be a playoff team. So I don't care if they're 17-0 or they're 9-8. All I know is they're going to be in the playoffs. And everything from the regular season, whether it's rankings, standings, etc., pale in comparison and don't matter in comparison to what this team actually does come January and February. Because again, I have seen 3 straight 13-win seasons that have amounted to a total of 2 playoff wins. I don't care about regular season accolades or rankings or top 10s or MVPs or any of that anymore. It is about January and February. The entirety of these 17 games this regular season should be about preparing this group of 53 Packers, plus practice squad and everything else, for January and February. And so why it matters about this offense and why I want to discuss it is because I feel like there are some things in the way that this offense is structured that could ultimately hamstring the Packers come playoff time, when they ultimately have to get past some of the best defenses in the league and win at least 3 games in a row to win a Super Bowl, if not 4 games in a row to win a Super Bowl. These are the things that I care about. So no way, in my opinion, does Rodgers and LaFleur and this team as is fail to make the playoffs after back-to-back 13-win seasons. So what are the concerns come actual playoff time? So the first one that I want to go over is the one that I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, because A, we simply don't know, and B, you know about it already and you've heard about it from everyone, and that's simply the state of the offensive line. I wholeheartedly believe that Elton Jenkins is going to come back healthy at some point this season. Whether that's week 3 or week 16, we don't know, and we can never quite say for sure based on what just happened to David Bakhtiari a season ago, but I am very hopeful and confident that Elton Jenkins is going to come back at some point. I am also really hoping to take Matt LaFleur at his word that they are, incredibly optimistic that David Bakhtiari is going to be ready come training camp, but until we see that, we simply don't know. So I do have some overall concerns with the current makeup of the offensive line just based on the injuries. Let's say Bakhtiari takes some time to get back to form, or he suffers some sort of setback. And let's say Elton Jenkins isn't back until later in the season. Now, as I've mentioned before, you have an offensive line that equates to, Yash Nijman, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, maybe Royce Newman, Cole Van Landen, or maybe Jake Hansen, Royce Newman, maybe Sean Ryan, Royce Newman, who knows? But a significantly less valuable offensive line than if you had Bakhtiari and Jenkins in there. Now, you might already be thinking, but Andy, you just told me it doesn't matter until the playoffs, and clearly Bakhtiari and Jenkins should be back come playoff time, right? Right. I think that is it. At 2 years for David Bakhtiari and at a year plus for Elton Jenkins, you are by far and away hoping that Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari are healthy come playoff time. So all of that should be good, should be gravy, and I think that's the clear hope here, right? However, what I do have concerns with is how it affects Aaron Rodgers up until that time. Because we've seen in the past, and where Aaron Rodgers started to have struggles prior to his bounce back and back-to-back MVPs, was because the offensive line wasn't there, and because he started to have to drop his eyes and watch the offensive line, and started having to play superhero Aaron Rodgers ball, right? Where he's just looking to buy time everywhere and not run the offense the way that it's supposed to be run. And a lot of that was due to the fact that it couldn't have been, because Byron Bell and Justin McCray and those sort of guys were just letting people through left and right, and he wasn't able to keep his eyes downfield and had to change the way that he played his game. So if all of a sudden that happens, where Rodgers has to sort of change his style up, that would be concerning to me. And more importantly here, I think in some capacity, they've been able to get away with, at times, having Jenkins out, Bakhtiari out, etc. Because one, they've had some veterans to come in, whether that's, Dennis Kelly, whether that's, Rick Wagner. They've had some veterans that have been able to fill in those times of injury. But B, because you had a cheat code in Davante Adams. Davante Adams was able to get such easy and quick separation that Rodgers was able to do so much with that to keep the defense off balance, get the ball out of his hands, and keep the ball spread out. And then when teams doubled Adams, it opened up things elsewhere. So you sort of had this cheat code. And my concern here is, what if you have these O-line concerns to maybe begin the season, and you're not getting receivers who are getting that immediate separation because you don't have Davante Adams anymore, and maybe you don't have that MVS-esque or MVS level deep threat anymore, things start to get quite a bit more compact, and that puts a ton of pressure on Aaron Rodgers. Now you're talking pressure, you're talking wide receivers who are pressed, you're talking two safeties over the top. You start compressing the field quite a bit and making things incredibly hard on Aaron Rodgers. And even if and when Bakhtiari and Jenkins come back healthy, if Rodgers already got into some really bad habits at that point and started dropping his eyes and started playing hero ball, that may not be something that he can quickly get himself out of. So that is concern number one. Concern number two I have is Rodgers losing trust in his young wide receivers and losing faith in his rookies. The young wide receivers on this team, whether it's Romeo Doubs, Amari Rodgers, Christian Watson, maybe a Samori Toure, whomever it is, they are going to need to have an impact on this season, whether it's due to injuries or whether it's just a different flavor of wide receiver that they don't have on the roster outside of those guys, specifically Christian Watson and a little bit Romeo Doubs. They need those players to be successful in some capacity. I just talked about that MVS level threat, right? Teams had to be more aware when MVS was on the field that he could stretch the field. It's a huge reason why the offense struggled in that 49ers game. I wholeheartedly believe that. The field just shrinks because you don't have to worry about the deep third as much. You can bring those safeties in a little bit more. You can bring your corners in a little bit more. The field just starts to shrink in that situation. So they need a Christian Watson or a Romeo Doubs to be a deep threat on the outside that can threaten teams with speed and can, some level of consistency, so that they have to be aware of that. Even if they're not consistently catching passes, which MVS was not always, sometimes just the threat of that opens things up more for the, other wide receivers, the other tight ends, the checkdowns to the running backs. All of those things are more open because you have a deep threat on the field. So that means Watson and Doubs need to be effective in some capacity, because as much as I know Rodgers is going to value Cobb and Watkins and Lazard, and I think that three is going to get a huge chunk of playing time, you need more than just those three. Within those three, you do not have a deep threat. Within those three, you do not have a consistent playmaker, meaning run after the catch guy. You just don't have that. you need some of these younger players. And it could be those guys. It could be Tyler Davis, maybe in the slot with his speed at tight end. It could be the running backs more to the backfield, but you need something from those other players. And if all of a sudden Watson and Dobbs come in and they do their thing and Rodgers isn't happy with it and loses faith and gets frustrated, and now those guys don't get playing time, I just don't think the triumvirate of veterans is good enough on their own to bring this team to the promised land. I just don't. I don't think the Watkins, Cobb, Lazard trio is good enough. They need something from those rookies, which means Rodgers has to be a bit more patient with those guys and give them time to learn, because it may not be right away. And they're going to run some wrong routes. But if Rodgers gets frustrated, which either A, causes him to not look their way, or B, causes them to not get playing time, or C, makes them lose their confidence, that would be a major detriment to this upcoming season and this team. They need, specifically Dobbs and Watson, to be playmakers and to be that deep threat down the field. So those are big questions that I have as well. Next is very, very similar, but it's playmakers. And whether that's whether maybe Sammy Watkins regains his form, or again, whether that's a Tyler Davis or Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, what are we seeing more and more of from defenses, right? Cover 2 shell defense. We are going to prevent everything over the top. We're going to keep everything in front of us, and we are going to prevent explosive plays. So what that takes is special players to be able to make special plays. Now, you can draw things up from time to time. Play action can be a huge weapon in that regards, and Matt LaFleur has a phenomenal, if not best in the league, play action playbook and setting things up and disguising things with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. A lot of that stuff can work, but that requires a really good running game, which goes back to the offensive line. But I talked about this with Perry the other day. Who's the guy that you get the ball in their hands and you just think that at any moment they can take it the length of the field? You don't have a tight end in that regards. Aaron Jones is a playmaker. I'm not going to argue against that, but he's not a blazing speed guy, right? He's going to have to make a couple guys miss in the open field, which he can. And you also need the blocking up front. You need the blocking from your wide receivers. It just takes a lot to go into a 40-plus yard run for Aaron Jones. And we started not to see as many of those as soon as last season. At wide receiver, it's probably not Watkins. We know Lazard can make some of those big catches from time to time, but it's not consistent. He's not a run after the catch guy, right? Randall Cobb's not that guy anymore. And I just go back to it probably is Christian Watson. And that's a lot of pressure on a first-year rookie, second-round pick, right? There is a ton of pressure for him to be the guy that you can get the ball in his hands and he can take it the distance at any time. Some of whether it's a screen pass, whether it's a drag route over the middle, just some of those plays where you get the ball in his hands and he can make magic happen. Because quite frankly, while there could be a player or two that make that happen from time to time, you just need a guy that can go the distance at any given moment. Those explosive plays are so incredibly important. It is really hard to go 80 yards over and over and over to get a touchdown, and then also convert in the red zone where things tighten up so incredibly much. And this team doesn't exactly have a A1 red zone threat either. So they're going to need some playmakers. And to me, that really starts with Christian Watson. You need teams to honor the fact that he could take the ball to the house at any given moment. And if that doesn't happen, teams are going to stay in that cover 2 shell. And of course, the running game could help a lot there too. But without other playmakers making those dynamic plays, it just is going to put a ton of heavy lifting on Aaron Rodgers and Matt LaFleur and that offensive line to buy time, to create running lanes, to get the explosive run plays going. So they're just going to need a lot, I think, from Christian Watson and this entire group to be a bit more explosive than maybe they have been in the past. The other thing I'm concerned about is lack of early and easy separation. As mentioned, Davante Adams was a cheat code, and he could get that quick, easy separation so fast. And I'm just not sure that if Rodgers needs to check to something, if there's pressure, if there's a quick blitz, does Allen Lazard, does Sammy Watkins, do some of these receivers, the rookies, Amari Rodgers, Randall Cobb, are they gaining quick, easy separation? Because I'm not sure there's a wide receiver on this roster right now that you can count on consistently that they're just going to immediately win that route. And if that's the case, again, that puts more pressure on the offensive line, which once again, we don't know the health and status of Bakhtiari and Jenkins, which then puts more heavy lifting on Rodgers. And you can start seeing how some of these dominoes could affect one another, right? You have an offensive line that's maybe a bit beat up or maybe just learning to gel together still. Meanwhile, your receivers aren't getting the same level of separation that they did when you had a Devontae Adams. You know, you're counting on a rookie wide receiver, Christian Watson, to be your deep threat on the outside and replace MVS, but Rodgers hasn't traditionally had success with rookie wide receivers. You can see these things starting to stack together and why like one or two dominoes go the wrong way and everything starts to collapse. So those are my main concerns. And once again, through the course of the season, they're just going to be better than teams, and they're going to win games, and they're going to win 10, 11, 12, 13, however many games that they need to win to get in the playoffs. But come playoff time, you know, once again, there's going to be teams that are going to be play a very aggressive, physical cover two shell with press man-to-man, and can Lazard and Watkins or those rookie wide receivers, Randall Cobb, can those guys get off of coverage? Will the wide receivers struggle to separate? What's the state of the offensive line in that game? Do you have a healthy David Bakhtiari? Do you have a healthy Elton Jenkins? Does Rodgers start to play hero ball and drop his eyes? Do you have a deep threat that can stretch the field and make those safeties play back so that the underneath is open and those safeties don't start crowding and everything becomes so incredibly tight? Does Rodgers have to do all of the heavy lifting on the offense and probably try to do too much? They're just in that situation would need, like everything else needs to be perfect, right? They're going to need some players simply to step up, especially from a playmaking standpoint. So how does it work? How do you fix it? Of course, the defense and special teams can do a lot of the heavy lifting as well. And I very much, I want to say this very clearly. The formula to me of a top 5 defense potentially with an MVP quarterback is a beautiful formula. I legitimately believe you have a real chance to win a Super Bowl with that formula. Like, even if everything else isn't perfect, I love what that can be. And I'm excited to see this season. But Rodgers is going to need some help. If they can stay healthy on the offensive line, if they can stay balanced on offense, meaning run and pass, you know, closer to a 60-40 split, maybe even better than that if you can run the football a lot, stay out of third and longs, and develop your young players. If the Watsons and the Dobbs and the Amari Rodgers, the Tyler Davises, the Kylan Hills when he gets back, you know, your young offensive linemen, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, Sean Ryan, etc. If those players can take a step, then you're far less concerned about the state of the offense. But the offensive line's a little bit beat up, the wide receivers don't come along, then I start having some concerns that we listed already. I really think this is going to be a fun team to watch. I can't wait. That's going to do it for me today. Appreciate you joining me. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.